Hello! I got 3 different leftists and I interviewed them all. They all have different outlooks and I wanted to compare their answers. The reason I'm doing this is because probably the biggest meme when it comes to leftist discourse is leftist unity and division among the left. Because in my opinion, the vast majority of leftists probably agree on 90% of the actual issues and probably agree on 90% of the way to go about it. There are just some things that are kind of big when it comes to their end goal that divides them. And for some reason, for a lot of them, it just gets in the way of even working with others. I interviewed Socialism Done Left, the Manic Pineapple, and my friend WoahChuck. Socialism Done Left describes himself as a market socialist, and he's definitely a reformist. He is against revolution. WoahChuck describes himself anywhere from a libertarian socialist to a Marxist, and he himself seems to think that reform is necessary in the short term, but does think that if we do reach a roadblock, then maybe revolution is necessary. The Manic Pineapple seems to describe himself as a social democrat, and because of that, I didn't really ask him any questions about revolution, because he's not a socialist. So yeah, I asked them all the same questions, and we'll see whether they're similar or not, and whether if there's any major differences between them. I try to tackle certain questions on things that divide the left the most, like reform and revolution, authoritarianism versus libertarianism. So this is to see if leftist infighting is even worth it, and it's kind of a thought experiment. According to YouTube analytics, you're the only person not subscribed. You should try and fix that. Can you kind of just give an introduction? Define yourself politically also.
Oh god. Oh no!
Got you.
Sure, I'm Aiden. I run the channel Socialism Done Left.
Hi, my name is the Manic Pineapple. I am a content creator who makes video essays about bullshit and sometimes dips his toe into political stuff.
Hey, my name is Chuck. I have a YouTube channel and I stream when I want to because I'm gonna do a fucking schedule.
The political ideologies I would come closest to would be a form of progressive market socialism. Another term that I quite like the idea of is the developmental state. Market socialism here basically means a worker cooperative and state-owned market that seeks to serve, and plus nationalization for some sectors, trying to serve everyone. And then the developmental state idea is just that the state can actively intervene to improve the quality of markets.
I'd be somewhere between the Liberal Party and the NDP by Canadian standards.
Politically, I don't really have an ideology. I don't really put myself anywhere. But if I had to put myself in an ideology, it'd probably be democratic socialist or libertarian socialist. I do, however, read a lot of Marxist theory and things like that because I'm kind of starting to trend that way. So I just call myself a leftist because I agree with most things like that.
What is the number one thing that the average leftist at home can do to help the leftist cause overall, and how much importance do you put on local organizations and planning, whether it be direct action or electorally?
Oh god. Oh, those are two really big, different questions.
I believe in organizing through different communities, and I'm saying by communities I mean organizations like the DSA or the Freedom Fighters Coalition in Boston. They do a lot of things to organize in the workplace, things like that. The FFC, excuse me. I also the DSA. I've worked with the DSA a lot on helping the poor and things like that. I do believe in trying to organize and elect leaders democratically that will help us in the workplace as well. So I believe that's the only way we can do it. Just organize and with different organizations like the DSA or the Freedom Fighters Coalition and democratically electing leaders to help us in the workplace.
I guess probably the most important thing you could do would be joining either a local TSA, and that is involved in canvassing, year-round canvassing, or this is something that I constantly show the book Politics is for Power by Hirsch. He suggests also that you can either set up or join your local Democratic district, and you can use that to get funds for year-round canvassing. And basically the suggestion is that having grassroots on the ground, sort of constant political organizing, is a really great way to get something 800 or so people actively involved in the political process.
Okay, so for starters, so what can a leftist do best? I think that in terms of raw organization, I think that trying to become as familiar as you can with your local issues is incredibly, incredibly important.
On the other level, if you have a switch to suddenly get 1 million followers on YouTube or something, there is a lot of evidence that media changes people's minds. Even stuff like op-eds can change people's minds. So if you want like grassroots on the ground volunteering, it's communal organizations, and I think it is a mixture of direct action, like personal connections, charity, trust sort of networks, and also just like going out and canvassing, talking to people. Deep canvassing, which is this tactic where you just talk to people for a really long time, basically, as opposed to like normal canvassing or shallow canvassing, where you just say, "Hey, go vote, please."
Organizing is one thing. I think that like if you're trying to figure out what you can do, that's incredibly important. But I think the starting step is know the local issues as well as you possibly can, and that doesn't even have to be at a local level. I think that if you want to take part in the discourse and make positive change, the best thing you can do for the movement is be well acquainted with the issues, because the last thing you want is a Steven Crowder showing up on your campus and you being the idiot that he frames as like this is the strongest that the left can provide.
Oh God.
You don't want that to happen.
What would you say is your biggest concern politically, whether it be for the world, your country, the working class, just something that's a red flag or something of concern?
Fascism.
I think that the biggest threat is probably the U.S. sliding to fascism.
A really big problem is healthcare in America, because we're one of the most developed countries that doesn't have a universal single-payer plan or some type of plan that's government funded. We're very developed and we have the money to do it, and I think it's a huge problem that a huge amount of people in this country don't have healthcare and they don't have access to it. So I believe that a single-payer plan in our country is something that we very much need, and it's something that we need to do soon.
And I think that if the U.S. turns fascist, basically the world's going to go fascist for like 20, 30 years at least or something.
So, briefly, what is your ideal economic and political system? Just in a little bit more detail than a label.
I really like what Quebec has in terms of its economic setup. Again, I'm not a socialist. I'm not as far left as some people in the leftist sphere are. But in Quebec, we have a safety net for people who are unemployed. I'm a huge proponent of that. Obviously, we already have healthcare. I've mentioned that. We're fighting for dental. I'm in full support of dental. And to be completely honest, I'd push it a little further.
Sure. I mean, so like I said, I'm a market socialist. I like the idea of the developmental economy. So the suggestion there is something like a large market sector, basically dominated by cooperatives or state-owned corporations, and then some nationalized firms. So like it seems like a lot of sectors, like say healthcare, education, transportation, a lot of like telecommunication, basically stuff that we think of as like infrastructure or public goods. Those tend to do better with state control, whether it be by like direct nationalization or like a number of state firms that can like compete against each other. Basically because they're natural monopolies. That's like the idea is that competition doesn't work well in these sorts of sectors. So for example, in like say fiber optics or something, it's expensive to lay the same cable twice to the same home, so it's very hard for multiple firms to compete to laying fiber optics to the same home. The same is true even more so for stuff like utilities like electricity or infrastructure like railroads. So that seems naturally to fall in like the nationalization category. And then the market category is where competition seems more useful, because you can have hundreds or thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of businesses all competing to provide the same service. The utility of competition seems to be that it's correlated with like a decrease in prices, because like even Marx would fucking tell you this, that like when corporations have to fight each other, when firms have to fight each other, they have to reduce prices to try and gain market share.
My ideal society is a classless, moneyless society. If I could have a perfect society, it would be like that.
And I guess if I had to sum all this up, I think that the fundamental thesis of socialism is economic democracy. The question is simply how best to deliver it and how most efficiently to deliver it, to sort of maximize democracy and maximize the benefits to everyone.
I don't believe in money in my perfect society. I think that the human nature of just like coming together and working towards a better society is something that every person has. So I just believe in, yes, a communist society, and a textbook definition of communism is my ideal society. I think we should, and if we can't get towards that, or if that's my ideal society, another one of my ideal society is probably like a democratically elected like board of people that put things up for us and help us, and it's not rather just a president, it's like a board of people that do everything that the country needs and wants, and that's one of my other ideal societies. A lot of people put that under democratic socialism. I don't put it under that. It's kind of Luxembourgism. kind of under a lot of ideologies, because Luxembourg talked about that. So I don't know. Communism is my ideal society.
Who or what are your biggest influences when it comes to your political beliefs?
Yeah. When I first got into politics, I had an open mind. I wasn't a centrist. I was left. I didn't really see things left or right. I kind of saw things like, yeah, the Republicans have never helped my family or me as a person, so I'm just gonna think the Democrats are cool. But then I realized how much the Democrats are exactly as the Republicans, taking PAC money and doing shit that is not gonna benefit us, and spending so much money with war and military things like that. I think my biggest influence is well, I could like do a few different ones. When I started reading like theory and shit, all my books are up there because my brother got most of them, and I just took the ones he like stopped reading. But the person that got like radicalized me, I guess, or gave me this radical agenda was probably Bernie Sanders, because I would watch his debates or watch his speeches and I'd be like, this guy really wants to help me, and his ideas are not crazy. Like, people think they're crazy Bernie, whatever it is, but that's the kind of guy that turned me onto the side.
Okay, so I've mentioned this before, but I do have somewhat of a background in business. For that reason, I do still read like a good amount of like economic literature. One of my closest friends is, he's getting his master's degree in economics, so like we're buddy, and like we exchange like literature all the time pertaining to like economic stuff.
I give a spectrum of them. I would name Paul Cockshott, who is a Scottish reformist Marxist-Leninist who talks about computation and central planning. I would talk about Mariana Mazzucato, who talks about the role of the state in improving markets, improving like research and development in particular, but just also more generally creating more efficient markets. I would talk about, maybe it's not necessarily Meidner's, like there's a guy named Rudolf Meidner from Sweden. It's not like he wrote a lot of books. Particularly some of just the policies he talked about, which is like the Rehn-Meidner labor plan, which is what Sweden had for a while. It was a form of sectoral bargaining, and the Meidner plan to eventually socialize the economy. And I guess maybe one last one would be Darren Acemoglu.
How do we prevent and stop future imperialist actions by the U.S.?
There hasn't really been a huge movement on things like this. Yes, we've had like the wars, like pull out of wars, things like that. It's great, but we haven't really had a huge movement on ending U.S. imperialism. We haven't had a movement on that.
Yeah,
and I think if we had something as big as like an organization like the DSA, or we can even say like Black Lives Matter as a, you know what I mean, like as a social movement.
Mm-hmm.
If it had something as big as that, I think that if someone starts that, even I could start that, and it could blow up. I feel like we could do something to stop U.S. imperialism through protesting, through organizing, things like that. But you can't end something without organizing. You can't. It's impossible.
I think the answer probably comes from the United States itself. It seems like there's only two options. Either one, you win a revolution in a sufficiently big country that you can fight the United States, and then you're in a position like the Soviet Union, in which you fight a really long, like protracted battle where you use autarky, like economic policies that don't use imports. You close yourself off from the rest of the world, and you like kind of descend into authoritarianism. That seems to really suck. So the model of resisting the United States just doesn't seem to work. Resisting the imperialist powers, they're just too fucking strong. This is one of the reasons that I say that I think that that socialist reform in particular has to come from the first world, because it has to. It just doesn't seem like third world revolutions can survive without being crushed.
Like getting your troops home would probably be a good start, in my opinion. But aside from that, unfortunately, I'm probably the wrong person to ask as to like how you would go about doing that.
Do you think a revolution is necessary for a social society to happen? And do you think a revolution in the U.S. can even happen?
I think if we had a political revolution, it'd be much better than because in a normal revolution, we'd kill the people that we would kill the most people that we would want to help, which is the poor, because they would die. So I feel like if we had a political revolution rather than a violent revolution like that, we could bridge off to a system that we'd want.
I think to answer the second part, no, we have no examples of successful socialist revolutions in liberal democracies. Zero, not one. Even if you think that revolution was like the right way to do it in China or Russia or whatever, even if you think Lenin or Mao were totally right in their theory, that theory doesn't seem applicable to high-income first world democracies. So on the first bit, is it necessary? I would also say no, I guess, which necessarily follows from me being a reformist and think it's impossible and not being a doomer. So I don't think it's necessary. I do think that you can gradually change all the institutions we have from one type to another. If you want a direct analogy, I would point to that of England. There was no true civil war, no like large scale mass death, mass killing, mass fighting after 1649. And yet the aristocratic elite was withered and whittled away by the rising bourgeois elite who built a bourgeois democracy that in turn, I argue, and this is I think part of the thesis of Acemoglu, was in turn partially replaced and whittled away with the modern rise of like the welfare state and like the mostly worker and poor dominated democracies that we have today.
Why do you think fascism is becoming more prominent in recent times? How do we combat the current status quo while also making sure people don't go towards the alt-right pipeline and white supremacist and fascist groups as an alternative to the status quo?
I think the answer for why it's rising is complicated. The main reasons seem to be about what's so-called cultural anxiety. A lot of people are afraid of the rapid changes that are going on.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing people that he wasn't there.
Economic views have mostly continued to gradually shift left, but social views have shifted left much faster than economic views have. Just 20 years ago, gay marriage wasn't legal in most countries around the world. Now it's almost the law of the land everywhere, in the first world anyway. And that's incredibly quick. And the biggest reason why, and I agree with Shore on this one, is basically the rise of education.
Education's a fucking hell of a drug. So these people they're so uneducated. They're like insanely uneducated.
We took it as a given that Black people deserve to be with us in North America. We took it as a given. We took it for granted as leftists. And what happened was that the far right saw that weakness and they beat the shit out of us rhetorically. They said, well, actually, here's some data suggesting that Black people have lower IQs. And, wherever Black people seem to be, that's where crime seems to be. And if you look at the rate of illegal immigration and so on and so on and so on, and it's horrifying, obviously. Like, as a leftist, you want to scream, but you can't. You cannot scream in the face of evil. You have to stand your ground and combat it. And unfortunately, where we ended up was a place where we were so utterly arrogant in our confidence, just utterly arrogant in our assumption that fascism would just be defeated by common decency. You can never expect common decency.
Should a socialist nation, quote unquote, export socialism to other nations and try to spread its ideology?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like something that would be a good idea if we found a way to achieve it to its most. You understand? Like, if we found a way to achieve socialism down to the goddamn paper, down to the definition, because a lot of capitalists say, well, Soviet Union this and Soviet Union that, whatever it may be. If we can achieve it and make it work perfectly, not perfectly, but good, we could spread it, and that would be a good idea. But I think if we kept the system, and if we kept working on it to ourselves, we should work on the system and then later spread it when we think it's a good time to spread it.
There's two reasons for this. One is the pragmatic and one is like the moral, I suppose. The pragmatic one is the more people, the more countries that share an ideology close to you. It doesn't need just to be socialism. It can just be moving countries left, right? The more countries that share an ideology close to you, the less likely they are to like gang up and try and kill you. The less likely they are to embargo you. The moral one is you want people to be well. And if you're like a socialist and you don't think that like borders really matter, why would you stop at the border? If borders are just arbitrary, why would you only want people in your country to succeed? I think some people, and I guess this will be my jab at the people on the left, I think some people on the left really adhere to this idea of national sovereignty despite claiming to be like internationalists. And I think that's absurd. There's no reason why a border should decide like where democracy starts and where democracy ends.
What can we learn from the failures and shortcomings of past leftist movements?
To not let someone lead you. If you're gonna fight for the working class and the proletariat, fight together.
Economic leftism is no excuse for authoritarianism.
One of the things, this will sound like stupid, I guess, or oversimplified, don't seem scary. I guess would be the suggestion. Try to avoid a third Red Scare.
Optics, I guess. Is that
Optics, yes.
Yeah. If you could implement one policy idea in your country, what would it be?
Medicare for All. Because I believe that healthcare is a human right. And I think that corporations are fucking gouging people and the middlemen are fucking killing people. And I'm saying that I think that everyone deserves healthcare. And no one likes insurance companies. But when people hear Medicare for All, they think, I'm going to lose my doctor, because that's what they think their private plan is. It's not what I'm talking about. And that's not what we're all talking about. I think that Medicare for All would be a great thing for our country. I think that we are fucking desperate. We're desperately in need for a single payer plan. And we can clearly see that after the pandemic. I don't know how people can't see that yet, but we need a single payer plan. And I think that Medicare for All would be a great step forward.
The one most important thing would be electoral reform. That's kind of boring. If I just talk about an actual like economic policy, it would either be a social wealth fund or like public housing, or Medicare for All. Because I guess let's talk about like the housing one, because housing is the biggest expenditure for the poor. As a percent of income, I think it gets up to 50% for the poorest of the poor. If you want the number one thing you could do to increase the incomes of the poor and therefore decrease income inequality, decrease poverty, it would be a public housing program.
I would, because that question is really like the answer I'm going to give you is not going to be well understood by most of your audience. For example, my answer would be Repeal Bill 101, which to Americans is not going to mean anything. But Bill 101 is the bill that forces French speakers to send their kids to French schools. It's the stupid language law that forces businesses to have French be the law of the land, in which Italian restaurants got fines for putting fettuccine Alfredo on their menus instead of les spaghetti. Like, dude, I'm not even joking. It's some really fucking crazy authoritarian shit. So immediately, off the top of my head, Repeal Bill 101. Other priority, dental care and mental health care would be big on my lists. And then, because Bill 101 really, like, that one bill, if that one bill goes, Quebec just becomes, oh my God, it becomes so awesome. Like, it becomes such an awesome place.
Anything else you wanted to say?
Sorry for having long answers.
You can give at least for the video part of it, like, you know, like plug your channel or something and like just finish it off.
Sure. Well, you know what? I'm gonna start things off. If Johnny does get interviewed, sub to Johnny. If Johnny doesn't get in this interview, also sub to Johnny. And then sub to me after you've subbed to him. My buddy Johnny needs more love. And then, yeah, I'm the Manic Pineapple. I write video essays about art and stuff. So if you like that kind of stuff, if you like your Lindsay Ellis's and your H-bombs, then I very much fit under that kind of vein. My recent Johnny Cash, Neil Cicierega video is underperforming immensely. So give it a thumbs up. Give it just smash that thumbs up. Do it for Neil. And yeah, thanks for giving me this opportunity, Andrew. Absolute pleasure.
Do you have any like last words to say or anything else you want to say before we end this?
I think that capitalism is the root of all evil and is the most racist, bigoted system. And I just want to say, Socialism Done Left, I love you. And I hope when Andrew does an interview with you, it goes good. And someday I want to meet you or stream with you or some shit like that. So hit my socials, please. WoahChuck, literally everywhere. It's everything. So just hit me on that. Anyways, thank you. I appreciate for coming on here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks for doing this.
Of course.
In conclusion, most leftist infighting that happens is rather pointless and seems to be a means of making yourself feel better instead of actually trying to unite the movement to try to do some good. I actually really loved having these conversations with them, and I'll probably upload these as separate videos, the interviews alone. So yeah, when it comes to reform and revolution, authoritarianism and libertarianism, it seems like something that's so far off. When it comes to the vast majority of cases when we're actually talking about these divides, it doesn't make sense to draw a line in the sand between certain groups on the left. I mean, of course there are exceptions, like if there's a certain group of people that are so far off, like when it comes to any realm of competence or rationality, then it makes sense. But for the vast majority of the cases, it seems very petty. So yeah, it was very nice, and I think it kind of reaffirmed a lot of things I already believed, but it was nice to have an experiment on it, I guess. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.